Hi y'all, and welcome back to Heretics Bible Study. This is number 4 in our series on the legend of the lost word. Last week we looked at Moses and Osiris. Osiris in death floating down the Nile, Moses down the Nile to the Pharaoh's daughter. And they have that Egyptian background in common. But we didn't really look at it from a biblical standpoint, so that's what we're going to do today. Everyman's Talmud says, of the Hebrew prophets, Moses was preeminent and stands in a class by himself. What was the distinction between Moses and the other prophets? The latter looked through 9 specularia, whereas Moses looked only through 1. They looked through a cloudy specularia, but Moses through one that was clear. His apprehension of the divine message was therefore more intimate than theirs. The revelation granted to him was the source from which all the later prophets drew. What the prophets were destined to prophesy in subsequent generations, they received from Mount Sinai. Moses gave utterance to all the words of the other prophets as well as his own, and whoever prophesied only gave expression to the essence of Moses' prophecy. So Moses is a big deal. In everyone in the Bible, we get this great summary of Moses' life. Moses, the great personality who was God's agent in delivering the Hebrews from the slave labor camps of Egypt and molding them into the nation of Israel. Moses was born near the Egyptian capital, Memphis, at the time the oppressive measures against the Hebrews were being intensified. The Pharaoh had decreed that all male Hebrew babies were to be murdered. The infant Moses was saved by a stratagem in which he was set in the bulrushes along the Nile where the princess walked, found by the princess and raised in the Egyptian court. In spite of his status and training as an adopted Egyptian prince, Moses had a sense of justice and an awareness of his Hebrew background. One day, when he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he impetuously struck the Egyptian and killed him. When he learned that he was known as the murderer, he fled to Midian, married into the family of Jethro, the priest, and settled into the life of a nomad shepherd. There, God confronted Moses and commissioned the reluctant, stammering, excuse-making fugitive to go back to Egypt to lead the Hebrews out of captivity. Moses took Aaron, his brother, into confidence and persuaded Aaron to do the talking. The interviews with the Pharaoh were unsuccessful. In spite of pleas and threats, the Pharaoh refused to give up his slave labors. Finally, after God set a series of 10 increasingly ghastly plagues, the Pharaoh relented. The ragtag group of Hebrew fugitives followed Moses eastward toward Suez, but Pharaoh angrily changed his mind and sent armored columns to herd them back. The mighty act of God's deliverance followed, in which the Hebrews, under Moses' leadership, crossed the waters, pursuing Egyptians were drowned. The following 40 years were full of crises as Moses molded his motley assembly of complaining, unbelieving, and rebellious tribesmen into a nation. At Sinai, God through Moses entered into a solemn covenant with the wanderers. God and Israel pledged to be faithful to one another, and rules of conduct were drawn up, describing how Israel should respond to God's goodness. Moses' strength of character in spite of discouragement marks him as an all-time great among men. After bringing his people to the edge of the promised land, Moses died. He had welded the whining, faithless refugees into a disciplined, dedicated community, however, and had made Israel aware of its destiny as being God's chosen people. There are references to Moses in nearly every book of the Bible. So that's interesting that it brings up the the covenant, the pledge, the rules of conduct, because I wanted to say the Bible is the gold standard. So Moses is bona fide, and the Bible is the gold standard for how we'll measure everything. So, I mean, obviously we can use a bimetallism system, or of course. Gold standard is a monetary system in which the economic unit of account is based on a fixed quality of gold. Moses. Right? Just to have a commitment, parties need to trust each other. We're talking covenant. So Moses will be our gold standard, Moses in the Bible. And that way we all have one book, no matter what your translation is, we have one book that we can come back to figure out what the truth is. So Moses' story in the context of the lost word. It was this book here where we got the story of the lost word. Let's see, we can read that one again. Oh, if I can find it. It's not in the index. Okie dokie, I guess not. All right. This book, however, this book has a lot to say about Moses. Now remember, also in the beginning, there were other mistakes in here that we found just in the introduction. So just take it with a grain of salt. But here in the hierarchy, we have the birth of Judaism, Moses the lawgiver. The story of Moses is retold to every Jewish and Christian child and therefore tends to stay with the adult as a matter of historical fact, even if most people discount the exotic elements, such as parting of the Red Sea. The name Moses itself is very revealing. Strangely, the Roman Catholic Dewey Bible informs its reader that it's Egyptian for saved out of the water, whereas it actually means simply born of. The name normally required another name prefixed to it, such as Thoth-Moses, born of Thoth, Ramses, born of Ra. Remember, vowels are just suggestions. So Ra, Moses, Ramses. Or Amen, Moses, born of Ammon. Whilst the Moses element is spelt slightly different when rendered in English, they all mean the same thing. And it seems very likely to us that either Moses himself or some later scribe dropped the name of an Egyptian god from the front of his name. The Roman Catholic definition is probably wrong, but if there is some historical truth in the idea, it could be that Moses' full name was born of the Nile, in which case he would have been called Happy Moses. The name Moses is unusual, as it is one of very few ancient Egyptian words still popular today, in its Hebrew form Moshe and its Arabic form Musa. The Egyptians still call Mount Sinai Jubal Musa, the mountain of Moses. It is impossible to know today just how much of the story of Moses given in the Old Testament is historical and how much is romantic invention. According to the book of Exodus, the Pharaoh instructed that all Israelite male children were to be thrown into the Nile. This is almost impossible to believe as a historical fact, as such a barbaric crime would have been totally at odds with the concept of ma'at, held so dear by the Egyptians. Any pharaoh giving this command would be giving up his right to an afterlife when his heart was weighed. Furthermore, on a practical level, it would have been very unpleasant and unhealthy to have thousands of rotting corpses floating about in the population's only source of water. According to the Old Testament, Moses' mother was determined not to let her infant son die, so she placed him in the bulrushes at the edge of the Nile in a basket daubed with pitch, where he was found by the Pharaoh's daughter. It has long been noticed that this birth episode is almost identical to that of Sargon I, the king who reigned over Babylon and Sumer many hundreds of years behind Moses. Okay, we concluded the birth story is almost certainly a fiction created in the 6th century BC, echoing for the birth of the Jewish nation the ancient theme of creation emerging from the waters. It was also an excellent way of rationalizing how a general in the Egyptian army and member of the Egyptian royal family came to be the founding father of the Jewish people. We have no doubt that some aspects of the story were later inventions. One such was the description of Moses' mother as a Levite woman. That was an attempt to put history into an order that suited the story's later authors. Levites became the priestly tribe, and so the scribes, using logic of their own time, reasoned that Moses must have been a priest and therefore a Levite. And we've talked about them. The book of Exodus has clear indications, being a patchwork of 3 oral versions of the traditional history of coming out of Egypt, with confusion as to whether Moses or Aaron was the main player. Even the name of the mountain where Moses met with Yahweh varies between Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb. Acts 7:22 tells us that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And every king, Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on tablets of stone was absolutely necessary to mark the establishment of a new state. Every king has to be given his royal charter from the gods as proof that he was fit to lead and that there was a basis for law and order in the new society. These tablets could only have been written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, as Moses would not have understood any other script. Because today we rely on the written word on a daily basis, it is difficult for us to understand how special writing was considered to be in the 2nd millennium BC. The idea of messages materializing out of marks on stone amazed ordinary people, and the scribes who could make stone talk were considered to be holders of great magic. This is easily appreciated when one realizes that the Egyptians called hieroglyphics the words of God, a term that could be repeated often through the Bible. The story of Moses starts with a murder. He sees an Egyptian hitting Habiru, and after looking around to be sure no one is looking, he kills the Egyptian, the first of tens of thousands of murders this ex-soldier will commit. Unfortunately, the crime was witnessed by other Habiru, who reported the incident to the Egyptians. So Moses became a wanted man. He went on the run, heading east into Sinai, where he was taken in by the Midianites, also called Kenites, where he married the king's daughter, Zipporah. Theology and magic have always been totally synonymous concepts until relatively recent times. According to the Bible's story, Moses eventually returned to Egypt to release the bands of assorted Asiatics whom the Egyptians called Haburu, from slavery, supposedly using the powers of his new storm genie god to bring misery and death to the unfortunate Egyptians. Okay, I thought that was an interesting phrase because when I was looking up Moses in the Talmud, I found this. The question how God fills all space, could choose an earthly dwelling place for himself, receives this answer. When the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, "Make a tabernacle for me," he began to wonder and exclaimed, "The glory of the Holy One, blessed be he, fills the upper and lower worlds, and he commands me to make a tabernacle for him?" Furthermore, he foresaw that Solomon would erect a temple greater than the tabernacle and declare before the Holy One, "Blessed be he." But will God in very truth dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have built? Then said Moses, "If Solomon, whose temple is very much larger than the tabernacle, speaks thus, how much more must I?" Thereupon he uttered the words, "He dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High." But the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, "Not as you think do I think. If I so desire, I make my abode between 20 boards on the north and south and 8 boards on the west. More even than that, I can descend and restrict my Shekinah within a square cubit." Phenomenal genie power, itty bitty living space. Moses then took his people into Sinai back to the Midianite encampment and greeted his father-in-law Jethro, who congratulated the Israelites and gave wise advice to Moses. The prophet then went back up the sacred mountain for a meeting with the God who lived there. The storm god who lived in a black cloud told Moses that if any of the Israelites or their animals set foot upon the mountain or even touched it, he would kill them. This new god cannot have made much of an impression on the majority of Israelites, as they made a golden calf as soon as Moses had climbed up this mountain to talk to Yahweh. This effigy was most likely a representation of the Egyptian god Apis, which greatly upset the new god. He instructed Moses to command his priests to kill as many of these sinners as possible. And we are told 3,000 Israelites were slain. Whoever Moses actually was, he became a murderer in Egypt and spent the rest of his life killing huge numbers of people, both strangers and those who had placed their trust in him. So there's that. And then again, we have the Moses connection, because he wrote not just Exodus, but also Deuteronomy, which, again, Solomon and the temple has everything to do with the covenant. See, what else do we know? Okay, Moses is the little brother of Aaron, and Joshua is his right-hand man. Joshua accompanied Moses up the mountain. It was Moses who gave him his name. Moses is from the tribe of Levi, and he appointed the sons of Levi to attend his older brother, Aaron, who he named the high priest. Moses destroyed the tablets when he came down and saw the golden calf. And again, Moses is our gold standard. It's not sola scriptura, which means just Bible. So it is kind of like a bimetallism standard. So we still have the silver standard, and now we also have gold standard, right? All right, I think that's it. Oh, and another interesting note, the burning bush, which communicated with Moses, was one of the holy sites found by Saint Helena, who also found the true cross of Christ, and it is the site of St. Catherine's Monastery. So that incident is found in this book, and it comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. So the burning bush is the site of St. Catherine's Monastery, and I guess not the same site where he went up the mountain, so forgive that error. But you know me, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, y'all. I'm just reading books. All right, I thought it was enjoyable. I hope you had a good time, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace out.